This video is rather self-explanatory. You can pretty well tell what I'm going to be talking about from the title, but there are a few things that I would like to share with my audience since they are of course rather informative. Now, some of you may or may not know I am an Australian, and the differences between Australia, the United States, the United Kingdom, and most of Europe is that in Australia we adopt compulsory voting. Essentially speaking, the attempt is to try to require people to vote in federal and state elections. Now, you can tell by this video that I'm of course saying that voting is of course a sham, and I would not advocate anyone who has a conscience to do it. And here's why. Although failure to vote in Australia is illegal, it technically is something you can get away with, and here's how. For one, the penalty for not voting in Australia is $20, and that is, of course, if you cannot produce a reason as to why you've not decided to, of course, vote. That you can also potentially write a dodgy ballot and submit it, and they can't really do anything. But the reason why, in my view, why I have chosen to permanently abstain from the institution of voting is simply because it really is, in my view, grossly unethical from my perspective, because of the kinds of people we have in the system today, the kinds of philosophies and ideas that we have in our mainstream political parties. Now, for people who are non-partisan and people who are disabused with the notion of voting and that it can magically do some good, most people in Australia tend to hold their nose and vote one way or the other. Now, I'm not a partisan. I do identify openly as libertarian and as a card-carrying MGTOW, and I tend to hold libertarian values on most subjects. I tend to hold some degree of conservative values and some degree of modern-day liberal values. However, I can't bring myself to vote for the Conservative Party in Australia, which is the Liberal Party, because they talk a big game about family values, but at the same time they make no reform or no changes to family law. They don't try to make it a fairer and better institution. Instead, they choose to continue along with the same broken set of ideas, and they really just drum up a fuss about these issues for no reason. Not to mention that they also tend to agree with Labour, the left-wing party in our country, when it comes to the so-called epidemic of domestic violence. And one of the key reasons why I don't vote Conservative as well is, from what I just said then, is that the Conservative Party in my country doesn't present itself as a legitimate, alternative to Labour. It doesn't present itself as a party that actually wants, to pull in conservative voters. It's not the kind of thing that really wants to do away with some of the more pernicious aspects of modern-day liberalism. Now, I don't vote left because, although I share many values of the Labour Party, and I personally like some of the Labour movement ideology that they have, I don't really support a lot of the pernicious bullshit that they're doing. And one of the key issues that they've been bringing up over the past couple dozen years is gay marriage. Now, I don't support the notion of marriage as a whole, and this is really why one of the key reasons why I can't be bothered voting as a whole is because this particular issue to me is so utterly unimportant and so massively overhyped that it really does remove my will to take the system as a whole seriously, to genuinely go out there and vote, because you have the right wing, who supposedly love their family values bullshit, but aren't willing to make any reforms to the institution to make it better, fairer, or more equitable and better for children. I mean, they're willing to talk all day and night about how they believe in this, that, and the other thing, but they aren't actually willing to clear up some of the problems. They aren't willing to do something about the division of assets. They aren't willing to make any kind of reform that would make our world a better place, to make the family a better place. But they supposedly, the thing is, they do nothing. The conservative wing do nothing to make things better. And the liberal wing, being Labour Party, at the end of the day, push gay marriage because reasons. To me, the entire institution of marriage, I just can't compel myself to adopt one or of the other common positions on this issue because it's simply unimportant to me. The institution of marriage is people wanting other people to approve of their poor life choices and their poor judgment. That's what it really comes down to. I'm of the perspective that if two people genuinely do hold an attraction towards each other and wish to create a family of some description, that they should be within their rights to define that family however they so choose, and that's really all there is to it. The current, modern marriage contract to me is tantamount to slavery, because it really is in need of massive reform. But as I said before, the conservative wing of our political system is not willing to do anything about it. To summarise it, I would love to see the Marriage Act in Australia abolished, and I would go as far to say that absolutely no one with any legitimate, cause will be harmed by its abolition. I don't care about marriage. I don't care about the institution. What it was religiously to some people and what it is in law are two very different things. If you are a religious person who believes in marriage and whatnot, legal marriage has nothing to do with that. And personally, it is one of those issues that I cannot compel myself to care about. And personally, it puts me off the idea of voting for either one of these retarded political parties, whatsoever. But that's not the only reason why I personally am choosing to indefinitely abstain from voting. One of the key reasons why I don't vote is because Australian women are equivalent to Jim Crow era racists, and their manginas are basically Uncle Toms who love Jim Crow. And the reason why I say this is because about a year ago we had a huge campaign that went through the media, through government, and through every little institution about the so-called epidemic of domestic violence. It is, for all intents and purposes, the entire thing is just based on hate. The entire so-called epidemic, the numbers essentially are generated by defining everything under the sun as domestic violence, and the end result of this entire shit-talking campaign is the fact that government money, specifically men's tax-paying money, is going towards, hate groups like White Ribbon and whatnot. Now, to me, this is really where I just find the institution of voting to be, silly, is because both parties of our, both, wings of our political system, left and right, universally have agreed and signed on to this enormous hate campaign that is the so-called epidemic of domestic violence. In fact, Malcolm Turnbull, our right-leaning politician and Prime Minister, in fact, openly endorsed this particular program. So, to me, what really annoys me is that in this country, and why I really can't bring myself to vote, is that we have two parties who are both delusional and pandering, towards hate groups, and a, group of voters who are essentially Jim Crow era racists. I mean, Australian white women are Jim Crow era racists. This entire bullshit campaign that they ran was based upon nothing but hate for the purposes of a few small industry groups making a shitload of government money and selling a number of white ribbons to ignorant Jim Crow racists. So to me, there really isn't a reason to vote when these kinds of people hold such enormous power over the political system. And even beyond that, immediately after the Lint Cafe attack, mandatory data retention was passed into law, justified, of course, by the Lint Cafe attack, and was in fact endorsed by the Labour Party, the major left-wing political party, essentially receiving bipartisan support. And credit to the Greens, they actually did something about it by saying that we don't support this, we're not going to vote for it, and whatnot. But to me, both of these parties are abusive. They are, deluded. They serve, to prop up bigots and the domestic violence industry. They serve to push stupid issues and red herrings, as well as a lot of other foolish campaigns, really for the benefit not of the Australian people, but of, frankly, bigots, fools, manginas, and business. So, to me, I can't bring myself to pick up a ballot and vote for either one of these idiots, because I fear, and I frankly am disgusted by the notion that my vote could perhaps in some way validate what they are doing. So to me, the only valid course of action against this particular abuse on part of government is to abstain from voting, because no important issues are being put forward. I mean, we live in a country that has no First Amendment, it has no protections encoded into our constitution for freedom of speech, but we're debating whether or not butt pirates should have the right to sign a contract that is enormously outdated. And I mean, this is what we're dealing with here. The key issues towards maintaining a healthy democracy are being put on the back burner, but in essence, the issues we're focusing on are essentially pandering to a small group of nutbags. And this really is why I can't, in good conscience, go to a polling station and vote. Because I do not want to in any way empower these kinds of nutbags. Because they sure as shit don't deserve my vote. And I'm quite comfortable coming up with an excuse or paying $20 to avoid having to empower these assholes. To me, I'm really of the perspective that throughout most of the West, we've reached the point where the mainstream political system and both parties are utterly delusional and fundamentally dysfunctional. So to me, I would encourage people who share my viewpoints, share some of my values, who live in Australia, to abstain from voting. And one other important thing I could say is that voting is an illusion of power. It isn't real power. If you look at lobbyists, these are the people who get their agenda into law. These are the people who push their ideas down the throats of politicians and force them to make it into law. Lilly Ledbetter, for example, in the US, was a law based on lies, propaganda, and bullshit, but it was pushed by feminist blowhard lobbyists for so hard and so long that it became eventually law. So to me, and especially to MGTOW, voting shouldn't be seen... I think it's time to recognise that voting isn't a legitimate form of political enfranchisement. But lobbying politicians, giving donations, pushing your agenda onto these politicians is political enfranchisement. It is power. It is reform. So that's all I really have to say. If you share my values and if you think the same way I do, I would recommend abstaining from voting in Australia. If you have another opinion, a different view, feel free to share it below. I'd like to start a discussion about this topic. And don't be afraid to comment, like, and subscribe. You can do any number of those things, or none of them at all if you see fit. That's all, goodbye.